Trustee of the Professor M.L. Sondhi Memorial Trust, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to today's function for the release of a book of essays by late Professor M.L. Sondhi entitled India's Foreign Policy Selected Writing, edited by Professor Harsh Pant and published by Haranand Publications. The trust was established to promote the late Professor M.L. Sondhi's vision relating to the emergence of India as a strong but benign power, the family of nations. This includes promoting research and studies on various aspects of international relations in which he took special interest, including regional cooperation in the subcontinent, cooperation between India and Southeast Asia, and the future of the Asia-Pacific region. In its mission, the Trust instituted an annual lecture and prize in the memory of Professor Sondhi and has over the years conducted several seminars and workshops. The distinguished participants in today's program are well known and if not familiar to many in the audience, so I will just say a few words about him. Our chief guest, Sri Yashwant Sinha, was Foreign Minister in the Vajpayee government in 2002, prior to which he held the post of Finance Minister. He is a well-experienced in Indian politics. His contributions have been manifold. Before politics, Sri Yashwant Sinha had a long and distinguished career in the Indian administrative service. Among many honors bestowed him, in 2013, the French government him with the highest civilian decoration, Sir of the Legion of Honor, for his contribution to international issues, and in particular to his contributions towards the development of ties between France and India and the deepening of Indo-French strategic partnership. Ambassador Lalit Mansingh, trustee of Professor MLC Trust and former Foreign Secretary, has distinguished diplomatic career during which he managed to keep up his manifold interests in education and culture. Amongst his various postings, Ambassador was ambassador to the United States and High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and since retirement service, he has been engaged in several peacekeeping, educational, and academic institutions. For example, he is on the board of Trust for the International Crisis Group and Professor Emeritus at the Foreign Services Institute of India. Interestingly, I must mention that Ambassador Mansingh topped the civil services examination in 1963, which was only done in 1956. Professor Harsh Pant, an old GLNS, holds a joint appointment at the Department of Defense and King's College as a professor of international relations. He is currently in New Delhi as fellow and head of a research foundation's strategic studies program. Alongside his impressive academic output, Harsh regularly writes for international media. Sri Narendra Kumar, head of Haranand Publications, is a senior figure in Indian publishing and has worked with many authors. He is also associated with World of Education in capacity as member of Board of Directors of the Delhi Public School. He has had a long association with Professor Sondhi, in fact published several books edited by him when he was Indian Council for Science. Caveat that my object may be Cat's son, I think that Professor Pant has done an excellent job in his selection of representative writings of Professor Sondhi, and his introduction succinctly encapsulates Professor Sondhi's ideas on foreign policy and his perspective. It is reviewed on Sondhi's site. Most of his ideas have come back into the Indian foreign policy discourse with proverbial bang. From a personal angle, from observation course at home, I can perhaps add some color, but it required tremendous intellectual courage to express in speeches views that ran counter to the consensus of the times. I will share two examples from life that I had witnessed or have read in current debate. First, call had solely to serve in the blockade of Nepal 1989. 89 border checkpoints with Nepal extreme hardship to the common people of Nepal and severely impacting its growth. Professor Sondhi, in the wisdom of this policy in August, arranged a seminar at Indian International Center. In fact, it was very small. I remember I did a young student. Very invited speakers that were the spectrum of views, including Parliament. And he spoke about issues in public functions in Delhi and Hindu. Prompted a senior of then Congress government to call him anti-national and he came under increased scrutiny from our internal security apparatus. I may add that this Professor Sondhi was a kind of Sri Chandrasekhar and socialist leaders. Second incident in 1991, as Gorbachev initiated sweeping changes in the Soviet system, Professor Sondhi invites senior advisor Mission Arbor of JNU. I remember attending the talk in what was called JNU's old campus. The lecture hall overflowing with student teachers. But some months later, when he arranged a talk by US Ambassador William Clark, JNU Students' Union announced a boycott. Pleased by Professor Sondhi to join Students' Union, faculty and administration on deaf ears. The ambassador was greeted by a hostile student mob and forced to return as the police could not guarantee his safety. Such anecdote actually belonged to biography, and I am happy to say one sponsored by the M.L. Sondhi Trust is in its final stages. Lastly, Professor Sondhi was deeply concerned with the Tibet issue for most of his life. One of those issues where things have yet turned out according to his policy recommendations. As a reminder of India's foreign policy concerns, we have this morning's paper's lead reporting China names on Wang, where that before China negotiated India from 2003 to 2038, China claimed the Wang Bin goes, I quote, even the colonial illegal McMahon line respected India, China's jurisdiction and admitted that that was part of China's Tibet, end quote. I hope that foreign policy experts, practitioners will find the essays in this form of interest, debate, and contemporary policy challenges. I now request Lalit Masing to kindly chair the function.
Thank you, Vivek, for that very comprehensive welcoming address and for illuminating us on so many aspects of Professor Sondhi's career and his essay. I should thank Mrs. Madhuri Sondhi, Vivek, the Sondhi Memorial, for inviting me to join my former boss, Yan Sinha, my good friend, Professor Harsh, and this distinguished in the audience to launch the latest book of the writings of Professor Sondhi. I would just like to make a few remarks of a personal nature because I know that Professor Pant has worked very hard, has produced an impeccable selection of Professor Sondhi's writings, and he's contributed a brilliant introduction to that book. So he lays us through the book in greater detail. But I just wanted to mention a few issues that I felt was interesting to me as a practitioner of diplomacy. I must confess I read the book with great excitement and also with a lot of trepidation. Excitement because the period covered in the book roughly coincides with my career in the Foreign Service, give and take a couple of years. That was the period that he was writing about, and these are in that book. But the trepidation was because of Professor Sondhi's formidable reputation as an unsparing critic. When he disagreed something, he was direct, blunt, and as you will see from the book, quite painful for his intended targets. So whether it was the leadership of the country, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, Foreign Secretary, or the Foreign Policy Establishment, all of them, as you'll find in this book, have felt the sharp sting of Professor Sondhi's cane. Professor Sondhi had profound disagreements with India's first Prime Minister, Pandit Nehru, especially with his policy of non-alignment. He has criticized him for the way he dealt with China and particularly the Tibet issue. Professor Sondhi, the book reveals, admired Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri as Prime Minister, but had little patience with Sardar Swaran Singh, the External Affairs Minister. I will not go into the details of what he has said about Sardar Singh, but in one place he mentions that he thinks that he should be replaced by a younger man. Mr. Inder Gujral comes under a great deal of skepticism for his doctrine, the Gujral doctrine, which Professor Sondhi felt was minimizing the threat from China and Pakistan and was leading Delhi to what he called the Munich syndrome, that is appeasement. Professor Sondhi felt that Rajiv Gandhi and VP Singh did not have an adequate understanding of international affairs, and particularly of Sino-Indian relations. And he also felt that Mr. Narasimha Rao lacked both courage and ambition in his dealings with China. So I don't think he has spared anyone. So you will understand my trepidation as I went through the book and came to the period that dealt with my time as Secretary in the External Affairs Ministry. I also found the foreign policy establishment has not been spared either. Professor Sondhi continued to criticize the foreign service for being too cautious, too conservative in its approach on major issues, for failing to produce a coherent and integrated strategy for dealing with the challenges that India was facing. And there is a place where he accuses the Foreign Service of providing spineless answers to hostile propaganda. I felt sorry for my distinguished predecessor, Mr. J.N. Dixit, who has been named in the book for not being as smart as the Chinese mandarins. Okay, but we need to remember that this is not personal criticism. It emerged out of a conviction by Professor Sondhi that there were areas of weakness in India's foreign policy, and he had set very high benchmarks which had to be met, and hence his criticism of the areas which required attention. Perhaps the best way I think we can evaluate Professor Sondhi's contribution is to have a look at some of his core beliefs and see how it has fared over the 40 years or so that he wrote about and the subsequent period. I have come across about 6 or 7 of Professor Sondhi's beliefs that he pursued with great passion. Let me start with the first one, which is what should be the guiding principle for India's foreign policy? Now, all of us have grown up believing that non-alignment was the best course, and many believe that it continues to be the best course for India. Professor Sondhi made no secret of his allergy for non-alignment. He felt that during the Cold War period, India was misled into believing that it was opposing the two major power blocs in the world led by Washington and Moscow. In fact, he was convinced that India was actually made to believe that it was opposing the power blocs, but became an accessory of the leaders of the power blocs in maintaining the status quo. And therefore, India was prevented from challenging the status quo or suggesting any structural changes because of the constraints of non-alignment. He felt that non-alignment should be substituted by what he called non-appeasement. Unfortunately, it is not very clear what he meant by non-appeasement, but maybe Professor Pant can enlighten us on that. His second passion was dealing with China. Sino-Indian relations were central to his writings, and Tibet, he felt, was the core of this relationship. Had Pandit Nehru not ignored the advice given by Sardar Patel and other colleagues in the cabinet, and had Pandit Nehru actually challenged China's occupation of Tibet and supported Tibet's integrity and freedom, history would have taken a different course. The boundary dispute we have with China would perhaps not have arisen, according to Professor Sondhi, had we actually supported Tibet. And he was not supporting the Tibet cause simply out of sentimental reasons. He felt that Tibet was the heart of Asia, and as long as Tibet was under military occupation, it was a source of threat for India's integrity and for India's ambitions. So he was convinced that we should make every effort to rescue Tibet and maintain Tibet's position as a friendly buffer zone, but that did not happen. Even so, he persisted in advising government after government to use the Tibet card as leverage against the Chinese. Now, looking at the current state of India-China relations, I personally believe that Professor Sondhi was right, that we should have taken up a stand, and it was mistaken on our part to believe that being friendly and reasonable with China has actually given us any dividends. If at all, I think if you study the Chinese psychology, they don't respect countries that submit to their demands. They actually respect countries that stand up to their demands. And I think Professor Sondhi was right in his views. On Pakistan, again, another area of concern for Professor Sondhi, he accused a succession of Indian governments of practicing appeasement with Pakistan. And he said this was the reason why we had trouble in Kashmir. His solution was practice coercive diplomacy with Pakistan and make them pay for their misdeeds. He also felt, and remember this is in the 60s, he felt that India should support the cause of the Bengalis who were agitating in East Pakistan and should take up the cause of the Pakhtuns who were also agitating for a separate state in Pakistan. Now, I know that Professor Sondhi was happy that coercive diplomacy was practiced at last by Mr. Vajpayee's government, and the Indian military build-up in 2001-2002, according to Professor Sondhi, did produce results, and eventually we extracted out of General Musharraf a promise that Pakistan will permanently end the use of terrorism against India. The fact that this has not happened, but at least the follow-up could have been done through further coercive measures. Number 4, Southeast Asia. In 1968, Professor Sondhi was urging that India must develop closer industrial and economic relations with Southeast Asian countries. He also had an interesting proposal that India should seek a Buddhist-oriented consensus in Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. On East Asia, Professor Sondhi believed that India and Japan must strive for a basic understanding of mutual objectives, and he strongly urged a partnership with China. In West Asia, it was completely out of line politically at that time, but he strongly advocated establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. And on nuclear issues, he took a tough line on India's right to produce nuclear weapons. In 1968, in an article, he said that as a responsible world power, India cannot be subject to nuclear blackmail, and that India should never sign away its rights to produce nuclear weapons. Quite remarkably, in one of his articles, he mentions that, this was 65, that India can reasonably expect China and Pakistan to use tactical nuclear weapons against us. Let us have a quick look at the scorecard of how things have developed against whatever Professor Sondhi was calling for. Let's start with non-alignment. Of course, he was right on non-alignment. Non-alignment may have had some benefits in the Cold War period, but certainly its extended use was not justified. In my belief, non-alignment for India died in 1962, when after the Chinese attack, we discovered that our non-aligned friends were practicing non-alignment between India and China. So it was actually the government of Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee that replaced non-alignment with a system of strategic partnerships, which is the policy that we are pursuing today. And certainly non-alignment does not have any relevance for a multipolar and economically globalized world. Secondly, on China, what Sondhi was to urge decision makers not to be defeatist in dealing with China. He was urging that we should use the Tet Cut, give the Dalai Lama legitimacy, recognize the government in exile, Tibet government in exile in Dharamsala. I think much has happened in our relations with China, but much more remains to be done. What is heartening is that some of Professor Sondhi's suggestions now actually being carried to the fact that the government issued a statement saying it stood by an invitation given to the Dalai Lama to visit and his religious shows determination of government not come down by the threat on this issue. China is confronting us on issues like Member Nuclear Suppliers Group or naming Masood Azhar as an international terrorist. But we have seen that taking a strong stand on principle has actually isolated China and has won respect for India internationally. On Pakistan, it would have pleased Professor Sondhi to learn that finally there is a government that's practicing coercive diplomacy with Pakistan. And India has followed up on advice and now expressed for the repressed minorities in Pakistan, especially in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Baltistan, and elsewhere. Let's come to Israel. 1968, he talks about why we need to establish diplomatic relations. 1992, the government of Mr. Narasimha Rao actually decides to have diplomatic relations. In ASEAN, Professor Sondhi must have been happy that India has joined the ASEAN, and not only that, is now a member of the highest body in ASEAN, the East Asia Summit. Prime Minister Modi seems to be following his advice on creating a Buddhist consensus by stressing the role of Buddhism in our culture and in our external relations. Japan, already we have established a strategic partnership with Japan, and this happened, the initiative took place during the time of Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee. On nuclear, during his lifetime, Professor Sondhi saw India as a nuclear weapon power. And I think it's quite amazing that he spoke about tactical nuclear weapons, because nobody seemed to have given any thought to this until just a few years ago, when Pakistan developed tactical nuclear weapons and announced that it was going to use them against India. So, Professor Sondhi's writings were spot on, even though they were topical and they dealt with situations as they were. If you go through them, it is remarkable how contemporary and relevant they seem. I will close my remarks with a quotation from something that he wrote in September 2002, most likely as a message for the then Prime Minister, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And this is what I'm quoting. It is now up to the Indian leadership not to take a long summer siesta till the next crisis erupts. Instead, we should build on the success of coercive diplomacy. Now close your minds and think of the situation today as we face after the surgical strikes on Pakistan, and think of the advice given by a thought leader telling the government, do not take a long siesta during the summer, but follow up on your coercive diplomacy. I think I have, what I was trying to do was to establish that Professor Sondhi was a deep thinker who was way ahead of his times. And when you study the details of the proposals he made, it is quite clear that one by one, each one of his hypotheses is coming out to be correct. But he had an agenda, and there are many items of the agenda that are still waiting for us to fulfill. With these few words, let me request the editor of this book, Professor Harsh Pant, to speak about the book, and later on we'll request our chief guest to release the book. Professor Pant.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think one of the things that authors or editors should do at such functions is to speak less, because I think the book should speak for itself. But I'll try to talk about Professor Sondhi, because as a he was part of the intellectual establishment when we were growing up, when I was growing up, and learning international relations. And also we saw him as someone who was engaged in political activism. So it was a very interesting combination, one that one generally does not get to see so often. So let me begin by thanking Mrs. Sondhi and Vivekanand and the family for allowing me to edit Professor Sondhi's works. As an academic, we are used to editing our own works, our students' works, the works of our colleagues. But I think when it comes to those who have taught you, there is an element of not only an added degree of responsibility, but also a sense, I think, trepidation, because it's after all, one is not sure what's as a student how to present and how to articulate some of those thoughts that perhaps you were also engaged with as part of your growing up process. Now, as a student, I recall how popular Professor Sondhi was, and his course was in JNU. And I think he was also seen widely as a very charismatic teacher. And the sense that one got out of his courses was, in particular his course of Indian foreign policy and parliament, I think, that he taught, was that he linked theory and praxis the way very few academics or teachers could. And that added a sense of innovation in the classroom, that added a sense of that you were learning something different from a person who was actively engaged in the political process, as well as was a fine thinker in his own right. So I think as a professor, he was always there asking his students to challenge the established assumptions and ideas, which was again something which is relatively rare that we get used to in Indian academia. So I think that first interaction leaves an imprint that many of my generation perhaps felt for Professor Sondhi and what he did for us as a teacher. And because of his unconventional attitude towards ideas and teaching, I think he suffered a bit, both in the intellectual environment in JNU as well as in the larger political firmament. But I think he stood core to his conviction that a contestation of ideas is perhaps the best thing that an intellectual can give to the academic and the wider policy community. For myself, I think, in my opinion, there are a few aspects which make this volume interesting and unique for the next generation, which I think, as Ambassador Man Singh pointed out, might benefit if they read closely what Professor Sondhi was writing in 60s and 70s. I think, and this point has also been alluded to by the ambassador, that Indian foreign policy has been undergoing a gradual transformation since the early 1990s. Part of it is a result of the structural change that has happened. Part of it is the result of India's own rise, which has become a reality. Part of it is also domestic, that the rise of the center-right in India has given a new voice to Indian aspirations, to India's position in global politics and how India should conduct itself. And that has, I think, shifted the intellectual discourse, which has, to a certain extent, made it easier for some of us to understand where the origins of Indian foreign policy and also some of the consequences. Now, what is intriguing is when one reads Professor Sondhi's writings, is the point that was earlier made, is how far ahead he seems in his thinking. So all the points that were earlier mentioned, for example, his strong critique of non-alignment, his emphasis on looking at Asia-Pacific as a coherent unit around which and in which India can place itself or should place itself, his idea that important countries like Japan and Israel should be integral to Indian foreign policy and should be elevated as India's major partners, and his larger dissatisfaction with India's China policy and how India was using or negating Tibet as an important variable in that discourse is something that we are still grappling with, and is fascinating to read some of this stuff because as a student, unfortunately, we did not read them. And so I read them later on, when, especially when I was editing it. And so, as we look at the landscape of Indian foreign policy today, his arguments hit home. India today is no longer interested in mindless non-alignment rhetoric, and that's a very interesting change that has happened. And if you link that with the sort of discourse that Professor Sondhi was bringing into the mainstream, or was trying to bring into the intellectual mainstream. It's very interesting how difficult that transition has been. That even a few years back, the idiom through which Indian foreign policy was being viewed was largely non-alignment. So you had a group of very eminent foreign policy thinkers coming out with a document saying non-alignment 2.0. This idea that India needed perhaps that non-alignment for some vague reason should always be at the center of Indian foreign policy has today come under criticism. But when we read Professor Sondhi, we find that he was arguing it much earlier in 60s and 70s, that non-alignment has done something fundamental. It has not only made Indian foreign policy reactive, but also as an idea, as someone who believed in idealism, in a sense of values, as a value system also, it has corroded India's ability to intervene in major policy debates. So I think from a student of Indian foreign policy, as a student of Indian foreign policy, I found that very, very interesting, that criticism of non-alignment, I as a student never learned in my classroom. So to read it later on is to open yourself to an entirely different set of worldview, which was openly critiquing and provoking and trying to provoke a discussion on the fundamental aspect of Indian foreign policy, which some of us take for granted. Then I think, interestingly, as we read in today's newspapers that Mr. Modi is going to visit Israel and is going to dehyphenate India's Israel policy with the issue of Palestine. It's again very interesting to see what Professor Sondhi was writing early on, saying that Israel should be seen as an important partner in Indian foreign policy, irrespective of other actors in the region. And in the same vein, he was arguing, for example, about Japan should become a fulcrum of India's Asia policy. And that is, those discussions, those debates are very recent in Indian foreign policy discourse. But as students, they are very recent. That we find them. But if you go back and read Professor Sondhi's work, you find that was integral to his philosophy on Indian foreign policy. It was central to the way he was articulating a vision for Indian foreign policy. Similarly, this idea that Asia, what we today call Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific, India should have a broader horizon in terms of articulating its role in Asia. So this idea that India is not simply a South Asian actor, but an actor in the larger Asian landscape, and therefore India should have such partnerships like with Japan or with Vietnam or with Southeast Asian countries, because of its historical linkages, its cultural linkages, was integral to the way he was articulating India's position in global politics. And that, of course, stemmed from his dissatisfaction with India's China policy, including with India's policy on Tibet, as Ambassador Man Singh articulated. So I think if you are looking at this as a battle of ideas, then clearly today Professor Sondhi has an upper hand. If this is a contestation of ideas, and we wanted to bring this out for the next generation, for this generation which finds it so difficult at times to get contrarian views. So because at times we grow up with this facile argument that somehow the dominance of Pandit Nehru and Nehruvianism was so much in Indian policy discourse that other voices were not there. And I think as students, for example, when we study Indian foreign policy, this is a standard argument we come across. Pandit Nehru and Nehruvians and their perspective. And this may very well have been true, but the sense that there were some significant voices who were articulating an alternative paradigm, even at the height of Nehruvianism, somehow gets lost in the way we study and engage at the level of ideas. And I think this book in very small ways is an attempt to do that, and I think there are many more voices, there are many more articulations that should come out, and we should be, and when we as students should study and engage with those ideas. And so the book therefore is dedicated to Professor Sondhi's belief that perhaps contestation of ideas is necessary not only for a healthy intellectual life, but also for effective policy making, because he was an advocate, he was a foreign policy advocate and an advocate at multiple levels, and engaged and intervened in major policy debates in the country. So his academic life was interspersed with this activism in public life, which I think makes him unique, which makes his ideas unique, and which also tells us that ideas have life far beyond beyond what a particular political dispensation might allow you to have. So if you have good ideas, they will eventually drive out bad ideas, and this is what we have seen in the case of Professor Sondhi, and as Ambassador Mansingh articulated, that if you try to map out the terrain of Indian foreign policy, you will find that many of his ideas are being have gradually been incorporated and are being discussed more widely than perhaps they were at the time when he was writing them, when he was articulating them. And I think that's a tribute to the soundness of the ideas and to his ability to convey with a sense of conviction that contrarian ideas, while they may not be received very well at that point in time, will eventually win out if they have any substance. So with that, I think my hope is, and I think the hope of those of us who are behind this book, is that it will be read widely, and it will perhaps can shape the next generation of scholars and policymakers, and allow a more variegated debate on foreign policy in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pant. You've been a student of Professor Sondhi, and therefore you have greater insight on his thinking. And quite clearly, you have given reasons why many of us believe that he was actually the leading thought leader so far as foreign policy in India is concerned. Now let me request my good friend, Mr. Narendra Kumar, to present a copy of the book to be released by Sri Yashwant Sinha ji. Well, Professor Sondhi's grandson, Raghav, is here, and the publisher would like to hand over a copy to Raghav. Raghav.
I won't help you. You take your time.
Is he going to join the foreign service or politics?
No, he's joined publishing. He has flown all the way from Abu Dhabi just for this function this morning. He's leaving this evening.
Thank you. May I now request our chief guest, Sri Yashwant Sinha ji, to give his address. Sir.
Thank you, Lalit. After the masterly presentation by Lalit and Harsh Pant, there is not very much left to say or add as far as this book or M.L. Sodhi's thoughts are concerned. But on a personal note, as Madhuri will recall, and as Vivekanand recalls when he was a child, I got to know M.L. Sodhi in the early 90s, and we came from different backgrounds, but we hit off very well and spent many evenings together, in which I listened with wide-eyed wonder to his intellectually superior words of wisdom. He had, as we are aware, spent considerable time in Czechoslovakia, Eastern Europe, and Václav Havel was just coming up in that country and later on became its president. And Professor Sodhi used to tell me about how he saw the developments in Eastern Europe generally and in Czechoslovakia in particular. And there were many issues on which we pondered together on whether they could be repeated or replicated in our context. I have always considered myself very lucky, very fortunate that I got to know him personally, and I'll always cherish my association with him. So therefore, when Madhuri approached me and said, Harsh Pant has edited a book and Narenji has published it, and whether I could make myself available to for this function, I agreed absolutely readily. The date had to be changed from the last week of February to the first week of March. And I said, I'll not disappoint you, I'll still come because of my memories of Professor Sodhi and my commitment to his contribution to the nation. And as we have listened to two very erudite scholarly presentations, there is no doubt that when you read this book, you will find that he was definitely ahead of his times. And there is no greater tribute to a person, to an intellectual, to a thinker, than his ideas getting implemented over the years. And that is what has happened in at least foreign policy. And many of Professor Sodhi's ideas are today reality. Given my own background, I was looking for something else in the book, and I'm glad you have brought it out, though it has not been mentioned today. And that's a chapter in this book about the reshaping of India's agenda in the UN system. And I was looking for this in particular because I was wondering whether Professor Sodhi had any thoughts about India's economic strength and economic diplomacy. And I found that in this chapter, he has dealt with it. And he rejected the Nehru Soviet Union model, and when the liberalization of the economy started in 1991, he lent his full support to liberalization. And as we are all aware, he recognized that economic strength and democracy are two very important strengths of India, which will forever stand us in good stead. And this is very clearly brought out in this when he is, telling us how we could play a more important role in global affairs and in the UN system. This is something which I have said earlier also, that in the 2 years that I spent in the foreign ministry, I did more external economic work than I did as 4 years as finance minister. Because wherever we went, whether it was a bilateral engagement or it was a multilateral event, economics appeared to dominate. I remember a particular episode. We were in a East Asian country with Prime Minister Vajpayee, and we were sitting for delegation level talks, and we had given a few $1 million to that country as aid, and the head of government of that country made a plea to Mr. Vajpayee that servicing the debt had become onerous and whether we could reschedule the debt. And I was sitting next to Mr. Vajpayee, like Lalit is here, and I whispered in Mr. Vajpayee's ears, and I said, "Inka pura hi maaf kar diya jaye." And Mr. Vajpayee made this announcement that we'll give you debt forgiveness. Forget about the few $1 million that we have given you, and that will not mean the end of our assistance to you. We'll continue to give you assistance. And in this context, let me also remind you that when in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, there was a discussion amongst the developed countries. They were assuming a high moral stance when they agreed that they will give debt forgiveness to the highly indebted poor countries, HIPC. And India was the only developing country or a non-developed country which joined them in making this announcement that we will also forgive all our debts to the highly indebted poor countries. And we are all aware that post the nuclear tests, when we faced a very difficult situation globally, there were many countries from the Western world and elsewhere which used to give us a pittance of assistance. And at the end of it, when things normalized, we told them we don't want your assistance. We can do without it. Now, there are other countries perhaps which need it more than India does. And I remember a particular instance, either in the UN or somewhere else, some multilateral forum, that the foreign minister of a Nordic country approached me, and he was very disappointed that we were not willing to take their aid anymore, their assistance anymore. But that was a milestone that we crossed. The point I'm making is, in future, it will be the economic strength of India which will determine its foreign policy. There is no escape from that. Even our military strength will depend on our economic strength. A poor country cannot have an expensive military. That's a given. And we cannot go back to the days of non-alignment. I entirely agree with Professor Sodhi that it had outlived its purpose long ago, and as Lalit said, probably in 1962, we should have buried non-alignment. But we did not. And I remember attending a non-aligned summit in Kuala Lumpur, maybe in 2002 and 2003, where most of the people, the representatives of the so-called non-aligned countries sitting around the table like this, were all deeply aligned. And they were still members of the non-aligned. They are American US military bases. They were non-aligned. They were parts of various compacts. They were still non-aligned. So we kept up that pretense in our time, that we'll forge strategic partnerships, but we'll still be non-aligned. So Vajpayee ji attended the non-aligned summit. He did not refuse to go there. And in our own way, again, we were trying to give the non-aligned movement a more robust economic agenda. And we were trying to see whether the non-aligned together could promote that agenda globally. I don't know what happened subsequently, but my preference has always been that instead of large groupings like the non-aligned, like the G77, we should forge strategic but small alliances. And I was happy, therefore, when we had the Russia, China, India trilateral. I was happy, therefore, when we formed the IPSA, which was India, Brazil, South Africa, which has been now overtaken by BRICS. It's far more effective to function through these small alliances than be at sea in a movement like the non-aligned. And therefore, I was very happy to notice that again, ahead of his times, Professor Sondhi was able to recognize this. And I don't know whether I should mention it, but it's here in print, that as far as the foreign policy establishment is concerned, he has called them timid minds. You can't expect revolutionary ideas from them. These revolutionary ideas will have to come from somewhere else. But I could empathize with Professor Sondhi because on very many issues we were on a common platform. He's dealt with China, he's dealt with Pakistan, he's dealt with various other regions of the world. And I'd like to tell you today that India can't really be a major global player with the kind of problems that we have in our neighborhood. Professor Sondhi was a strong, very strong advocate of peace in Asia. Can we have peace in Asia if China and India are at loggerheads? Can we have peace in Asia if India and Pakistan are at loggerheads? So we have to find a way out of these things which hold us back from playing our destined role in global affairs. And that will come only when we sort out our issues with them. The border dispute with China. We should go out aggressively and tell China we want to settle it. And there are already established principles on the basis of which further negotiations could be held. I am not saying it can be done in one meeting or two meetings, but long years of talks at the foreign secretary level. Then in 2003 we raised the level and we appointed the special representatives. Long years of negotiations between the special representatives, and still, as was mentioned, Aksai Chin and Tawang and all these issues are being discussed. My own feeling is that we should not shy away from telling the world and China that we are interested in resolving the issue and engage them in a discussion until we are able to find a resolution of this. Similarly with Pakistan, yeah, coercive diplomacy did pay. You will all recall that when Operation Parakram was launched, and then the Indian troops were finally withdrawn from the border and the line of control, then much fun was made of the fact that Vajpayee did not show any courage and did not have the guts to engage Pakistan militarily. My own understanding all along was that we had achieved the purpose for which Operation Parakram was launched, which was, as Lalit said, part of coercive diplomacy, and as Professor Sondhi has said. And the January 6, 2004 statement, it was only a joint press statement issued in Islamabad on the margins of the SAARC summit, and I know it because I was personally present, would not have happened, in which Musharraf made that promise, would not have taken place if Operation Parakram had not been launched. So therefore, I don't agree with them, those people who say Operation Parakram was a fiasco. No, it was not. But how do we deal with Pakistan? It's a very difficult issue. And it's not, again, easy to resolve it. I have been engaged with the Jammu and Kashmir issue over the last few months, and I have come to the strong conclusion that the road to Islamabad is via Srinagar and not the other way around. It's not to Srinagar via Islamabad. And this is something that we must recognize. We must settle our issue with our people in Jammu and Kashmir. Why are they so alienated? Why are we giving this opportunity to Pakistan to play ducks and drakes with us in that part of our country? And Pakistan, you can't fault them, will continue to take advantage of our weaknesses. So we settle with our people in Kashmir, then deal together with the Kashmiris with Pakistan. There are many, even today, rigidities in our foreign policy. Many rigidities. What happened 30, 40 years ago has become an article of faith, and we will not change them. We have changed a lot of them, and we must get rid of the remaining rigidities. Foreign policy must be conducted on the basis of flexibility. And in today's changing world, that flexibility could almost be day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. So you can't live with shibboleths which were valid 40 years, 50 years ago and say they will not change. So I think it is that which challenges the Indian foreign policy establishment, and I hope that there will be more people like Professor Sondhi who will think ahead of their times and give us the wisdom that the foreign policy establishment needs in this government. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for those remarks. There can't be a greater tribute to Professor Sondhi than for a former External Affairs Minister and a former Finance Minister to reaffirm the relevance of the views that he expressed and the policies that he promoted. Thank you very much, sir. Now, let me turn over to Mr. Narendra Kumar for the vote of thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I had known Professor Sondhi for a long time. Part of the reason was that my eldest brother was also associated with JNU right since its inception. I grew up in that atmosphere, but I didn't get an opportunity to study there. So I made it up by publishing books by almost all the important scholars at that time. Professor Sondhi gave me an opportunity to publish 4 of his edited volumes, namely Democratic Peace, the Foreign Policy Implications, Terrorism and Political Violence, Nuclear Weapons and India's National Security, Towards a New Era, Economic, Social and Political Reforms, the whole gamut of foreign policy issues. We have just now heard masterly analysis of India's foreign policy by Mr. Yashwant Sinha, Mr. Lalit Mansingh, and Professor Pant. I, on my behalf and on behalf of the Trust, would like to express our grateful thanks to them, as well as to you all, ladies and gentlemen, for your presence here this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I'll just say a few words of thanks really to all the participants in today's function who so kindly and without any fuss agreed to come and have given such an excellent analysis. It was very enlightening for me to listen to all this being put together, something which I heard over the breakfast table and dinner table for many years. Now it's all structured into a pattern. So that was, thank you very much for all of that. And I also want to thank the audience for coming here in such a lot of old friends I see and various other people, which is really a source of joy and happiness to celebrate this together. And I most of all have to thank Mr. Narinder Kumar, without whom literally this book would not exist. I was sitting at home, he rang up and said, I want to come and talk to you. When he arrived, he said, I want to publish something of Professor Sondhi's. You get together his writings and do it. And he pushed me into it. And then he said, it has to be done fast, because it has to be done by such and such a time because of some publishing schedule or whatever. He knows better. So he was pushing me, I was pushing Harsh Pant, and we were all pushing each other, and finally we got the product. So thank you very much for your energy, and thank you all of you. What?
Please join us for lunch. I was going to announce it. Who is the owner of this?
Yeah, exactly. He won all those prizes.
Exactly.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. Always.
Writing away. Thanks for coming.
Congratulate our Professor Sondhi. That's the best introduction I think. Apart from it, it's an extraordinary accomplishment.
Great.
I have
We are historical for you. What will you do where you are here?
no, I'm writing here.
But that was going to problem.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I keep last But you can see this movement. How do you reach this order? So, how are you feeling?
Yes.
Land you can't pass book.
I just need to give my dad his phone.
Come.
Just make it the fact that that is a pay.
Thailand.
And then say,
One can transcribe it.
yeah. लर्निंग तो बड़ा हम्बल हुआ अच्छा ये होता है